4,240. That is the number of unique book titles that were challenged during the year 2023. 54% of these book challenges happened in public libraries. And I work at a public library. In fact, I work at a public library where we are getting book challenges, and not only are we getting book challenges, we've literally had people protest outside of the library because of the books that we have in the library. I haven't been talking about banned books as much on this channel, partly because I am dealing with this in real life, but it is Banned Book Week and I want to talk about it again. Today I will be going over common myths or just common things that are said about banned books and responding to those things. One of the things that I really want to highlight this entire discussion with is the purpose of libraries and intellectual freedom. So I would like to read the definition of intellectual freedom because I feel like that will really help encompass this entire discussion. So intellectual freedom is the right of every individual to both seek and receive information from all points of view without restriction. It provides free access to all expressions of ideas through which any and all sides of a question, cause, or movement may be explored. And I believe one of the duties of public libraries is to promote intellectual freedom. Libraries do all kinds of things, and it's not limited to just books. It promotes literacy and education and opportunities and internet access to provide even more opportunities. But I think underlying this is the access to information and having access to information so you can determine for yourself where you stand on particular things, which means that the library might have information on opposite sides, information promoting two different sides of the same cause, question, or movement. So with that, highlighting the discussion, let's get into some of the common questions, concerns, and myths around book banning. The first one is books aren't really banned because you can buy them on Amazon. There is so much to unpack here, but I would like to start by providing an illustrative scenario. So let's say I went into a restaurant and I was being very loud and obnoxious and rude and harassing the staff that worked there. And I got banned from the restaurant. Would it be fair to say that I'm not actually banned from that restaurant because I can go to another restaurant? No, I'm still banned from that restaurant even if I can go somewhere else. So bans happen on all scales. You can have something that is banned in your house, but you can find it elsewhere. You can have something that is banned from a particular restaurant, a particular library, but you can still find it elsewhere. Or you can have something that is banned by your local, state, or federal government. There are all levels of bans. Just because you might be able to access this thing elsewhere does not mean that it's not banned. In addition, saying that the book isn't banned because anyone can just access it on Amazon is assuming that anyone who wants to read this book can purchase it on Amazon. That is assuming a lot, honestly, about other people's situations. There are people who cannot afford to access the books that they want to read or the information that they want to learn about. And it's also kind of contrary to intellectual freedom, particularly if we are banning books based on their viewpoint. So if we're trying to get rid of one particular point of view from the library, then we are not providing intellectual freedom because we are not providing the resource for people to study all sides. Common misconception number 2 is that books become more popular and sell more copies when they are banned, which might be true for some of the biggest, most popular titles. But remember that number that I said at the beginning of the video? 4,240 individual titles were challenged in 2023. Have you heard of over 4,000 different titles that were banned? Often the titles you hear about are the titles that have been challenged in the most places, which, yes, it's probably restricted access in the most places, but there's so many titles that get banned that no one ever hears about. On top of that, libraries purchasing these books are also purchasing the book. They're also helping pay the author. When libraries across the country purchase a particular book because it's popular, it's not just people going out and individually purchasing that book, it's the libraries are purchasing the book too. All of this in conjunction is part of book sales. On top of that, many people will try books at the library before they purchase it themselves. And sometimes they will find their favorite author by browsing the library. And they might not have decided to read that particular book if they didn't find it in the library first, or decide to give that author a chance because they could read it at the library first. So while some very popular titles might sell some more copies because of their widespread challenges, there's so many titles that are not getting the coverage and media press necessary in order to make up for the lack of book sales. Common misconception number 3 is there is pornography in the library. There is so much to unpack with this one, so buckle in. This is probably the most pervasive claim that I have seen about the content of books in libraries and why we should be concerned and why we should try to get these books removed from libraries. This statement is often much more alarming than just there is pornography in libraries. Usually the statement is that we are giving pornography specifically to minors, to elementary school students, to young students, or young children. And one that I've seen a lot, including at my library, is that we are giving instruction manuals of how to perform particular sex acts to children as young as 5. Not only are we making these available, we are pushing this on them. We are handing this to children and trying to get them to check this out. This is honestly the most frustrating claim because I feel like it is the easiest to fact check, but it continues to be spread around. So there were people that were protesting my library that made the claim that we had instruction manuals of how to perform particular sex acts that we were promoting to 5-year-olds. And they did not include any book titles that they said that we had in the library. And honestly, this is a very concerning claim. I would want to know what those titles are because no, that's not age appropriate for a 5-year-old. But I often can't find particular titles that they are objecting to. And I did get a title that someone claimed was in our particular library that we were giving to 5-year-olds. And that book was not in the chapter book section. It was not in the picture book section. It was not with the middle grade books. It was not with the teen books. That book was in the adult section. That book also did not contain the particular sex act that they were objecting to. It did not contain instruction manuals of any sex acts. It did talk about sex. But again, this book was in the adult section. And it would just be so easy to fact check this. If you have the title, you can figure out what section of the library it's in. You can figure out if that particular book talks about any of the things that are being claimed that the book talks about. Yet somehow this claim keeps spreading from library to library without any of those supporting evidence backing it up. On top of that, I do want to go into a discussion about what counts as pornography in libraries. Do libraries have pornography? And pornography is defined differently by different people, but the United States Supreme Court has given guidelines of what counts as obscene material. So I will read over these guidelines. A work has to meet all 3 of these points in the guideline in order to be considered obscene. This guideline is called the Miller test and was decided in 1973 in a Supreme Court case called Miller versus California. So the first point in the Miller test is whether the average person applying contemporary community standards would find that the work, taken as a whole, appeals to the prurient interest. Number 2 is whether the work depicts or describes in a patently offensive way sexual conduct specifically defined by the applicable state law. And number 3, whether the work, taken as a whole, lacks serious literary, artistic, political, or scientific value. In both point 1 and point 3 of the Miller test, it very specifically talks about the work taken as a whole. Often whenever you see people objecting to books in the library, they will lift sentences or passages from the book and then claim that these sentences or passages are obscene without providing any further context. If we are to actually determine whether or not that book is obscene, we would need to determine the context of the entire book. What is the book trying to say? Why were these passages included? What is the message of the book as a whole? Is there a point the author is trying to make by including these passages? All of this would need to be examined in order to determine whether or not these books are obscene, but that's not typically how these books are presented whenever people are making the claim that these books are obscene. I can also say that in my library, there are no books that would fail all 3 points of the Miller test. Yet there are still people claiming that we have obscene materials in the library. Common misconception number 4 is that book bans only happen in states like Florida and Texas. That's not true. Book bans are happening all over the United States. And I think this goes back to something I said in point 1, where bans happen at both a small scale and a large scale. In some states, it might only be one particular library in the state that is facing challenges. In other states, there are states passing legislation to restrict what can be in libraries. So this is happening at all scales in all states. And for my final point, I often hear, I don't want my taxpayer money going towards something that I don't agree with. But libraries are for everyone. If you walk into the library and cannot find a book that represents you or your points of view or things that you agree with, I recommend talking to your librarian about purchasing those titles, because the library should represent you. You are part of the community, but the library represents everyone in the community. And even if you are in a very small, mostly homogenous town in America, there is still some diversity there. And the library represents everyone in the community, even the people in the community that you disagree with. They are paying taxes too. On top of that, if we go back to my point about intellectual freedom, libraries should have books on different viewpoints so you can explore different viewpoints and do your own research and determine things for yourself. So that will include taxpayer money going towards things that you don't agree with, but in the pursuit of knowledge. Usually the amount that you are paying in taxes that goes towards the library is very small, but it adds up in order for the library to be able to function and run and have a collection of material available to the community. But you are only one small portion of this large pot of taxpayer money that the library receives. And the library needs to represent everyone in that pot. And that concludes my video on book banning misconceptions. If you have any questions for me on this topic or anything else you want to discuss, leave me a comment, and I hope to see you in another video. Happy reading.